Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Welcome to Inside Scoop Virginia. I'm Bettina Lawton, and I'm your host. And tonight we are doing the final segment, I think, on student rights and responsibility in the Fairfax County Public School System. When we did the show back on June 6th, it was right before the school board meeting. And we encouraged everyone to go. It was a horrible, horrible night. I actually watched it from home on the television. And it went on for hours. It was like a 6.5-hour meeting. The stamina of the school board members is absolutely phenomenal. That's all I can say about that. And they decided, we're going to talk about what did they decide, what is going on with the discipline process in the Fairfax County Public Schools, so that when those of you who have children in the school system and they go back to school in September, you're going to know what's going on. You'll have a little bit of a clue when you get that awesome document called the Student Rights and Responsibilities Handbook, or whatever the new name is going to be, what's going to be in there. So I am very pleased tonight. I have two school board members with us. I have directly to my left, Sandy Evans, who is the school board member from the Mason District. So welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Absolutely. I'm very excited about this. And I should say, for those who pay attention to these things, we have two. We can't have three, or we have like Sunshine Act problems or something. But we also have Elizabeth Schultz. Elizabeth is the school board member from the Springfield District. So I'm thrilled to have you on as well, Elizabeth.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here, Bettina. Thank you very much for asking me. I was looking forward to this, and mostly to wrap up this conversation and inform the parents in the school system about what to really expect this coming fall and beyond.
Well, and I will say, having attended some of the school board work sessions and the meetings around this process, I know both of you are very passionate about the topic. And so we're going to talk about tonight what happened. I want to have people find out a little bit, because you're both relatively new, although Sandy, even though you've only been on the school board since 2011, you're
2010.
like 2010.
Yes.
You're like a senior member at this point.
Well, that is unusual. Yes, I came on in a special election, and in March 2010, and I was the new kid on the block then, and we had elections then the next year, and lo and behold, now I'm a veteran.
Well, I want to know why you ran to begin with, because I must tell you both, I watched the amount of work you do and the number of work sessions you go to, and then I saw all of these graduations you were attending, and I thought to myself, my God, this is a full-time job for these people. So why in the world did you run?
Well, actually, it is a full-time job for me. Technically, it's considered a part-time job, but one of the things that I did promise my constituents was that I would be a full-time school board member, and I do feel strongly about that. When I first ran, I had just gone K through 12 with my daughter through the school system as a parent. And I had spent 6 years as a parent advocate as well. And so during that time, I saw things about the school system that I really thought needed to be changed. And so when my predecessor decided that she was going to run for the House of Delegates, I threw my hat in the ring and I said, I really want to go in there and see if I can make some changes, some positive changes. You know, and some of them I know we'll be talking about some of them tonight, but I felt that the parents needed some authentic engagement. I felt that people needed to listen to parents and teachers and students as well and give them credence. And I didn't feel there was as much of that as I would like. So that, in a nutshell, is ultimately why I ran.
Let me ask you what a parent advocate is, because I don't know what that is, actually.
It's a parent who advocates for change, generally for change. In my case, I had been advocating for later high school start times for some time, because our high school students start school at 7:20 in the morning, and that is not in keeping with their teen biology. It's not good for them mentally, it's not good for them physically, it's not good for them academically. And our school system has been trying for some time to find a way to change this. We've had two citizens task force that said we need to do this, but we haven't been able to get that change made. And so for 6 years, and now it's coming on to 10, I had advocated for that change. As part of that, I also got involved in other kinds of advocacy. There was the fair grade issue, which a number of parent advocates very strongly said, you know, we need to have a change in our grading scale. We're disadvantaging our students. That was quite a fight to get that accomplished. We did accomplish that. Honors courses was another one where parents came in. And of course, zero tolerance reform was the group that Fairfax Zero Tolerance Reform started advocating for students to have a change in the discipline system to better deal with the students as an education piece as opposed to being as punitive as we had been in the past. So those were some of the advocacy pieces, and there are many more. You know, parents have come in recently to talk about food, you know, in the cafeteria, and I certainly support that as well. So for advanced academics, that's another area. You have parent advocates who come in and say, we think that that program should be changed in some ways, should be stronger. And so there are a number of parent advocates throughout our school system on a number of issues.
Okay. Well, I had wondered because one of the things that the ad hoc committee had talked about were parent advocates in the context of the discipline process for the students whose parents couldn't show up. But that's another story, because first I want Elizabeth to tell us, you ran in 2011, right?
In 2011.
So what possessed you to do that?
Well, I think it was mostly a myriad of issues, but I can't deny that the closure of my children's elementary school and the process that I watched the previous school board go through under the auspices of engaging the community and listening to the community and looking at the data with community experts on different subject matters, and how that process ultimately came to a close and really was done to the disadvantage of the community as well as the taxpayers in Fairfax County, started to get me paying attention a lot more closely to a number of the issues. You know, my children had not been in any discipline trouble with regard to the discipline issue. I have 4 boys who are now college, high school, middle school, and I have a rising kindergartner this fall. So I certainly cover the gamut of our K through 12 program. But when I started really kind of paying attention to some of the issues, I did see lack of transparency on issues pertaining to the budget, and began advocating for an independent auditor for the school board. I'm concerned about having arm's length, you know, negotiations on contracts and a number of issues. And when I started looking at that and TJ admissions and whether we're preparing enough of our students for science and technology and math for jobs and for national security, I really started, you know, to pay full-time attention, and had not thought about running myself, and in fact was looking to recruit others, and ultimately, you know, the fingers started pointing back at me. So, you know, if you're asking somebody else to do something, you've got to be able to be willing to do it yourself. And at the end of the day, I really thought that somebody really needed to approach the school board position with the proper balance of listening to staff and understanding where they wanted to take the school system, but having some financial accountability and transparency accountability to the public, because I do see it that it is the public system. You know, it is something that we have to be accountable for as elected representatives of the residents, the 1.1 million residents in Fairfax County. And certainly then the discipline issue became very, very apparent when I became involved with the Nick Steuben case, and became involved with the Virginia State Legislature, and actually went to Richmond on 2 successive general legislation sessions to advocate for a change in the law at the state level, and that didn't work out. So here I am on the school board advocating for the change from within.
I think we're saying similar things here as well. And of course, another piece of advocating is advocating for parents who might not know how to advocate for themselves, people who are spending their days with their children in a school and maybe see things that they don't like, but they don't know how to go to their elected officials. So part of it is giving a voice to people and going out and making sure that we talk to everybody, to all of the stakeholders, and particularly the parents and the students who may not be particularly organized, may not have that connection, but who need somebody to advocate for them as well. And so we have a special obligation to those individuals.
Now, do you think that everybody on the school board has that same sensibility in terms of the groups? Because I've heard folks say that there are too many of these special interest parents, these activist parents, and you hit on some of them, the sleep parents, the fair grade people, the zero tolerance folks, and that it's a minute portion of the parents, and that really there's just this enormous number of folks who think everything is absolutely fine.
Well, my response to that would be, if it's an interest that's important to you as a parent, you as a student, you as a taxpayer, why is it special? It's just important. So I don't think that there's any particular issue that can be discounted by applying the label special to it, because somehow that demeans the issue, that it makes it somehow less important to someone else. So everybody is going to have a different level of interest depending upon their age, where they are in raising their children, and what their personal experiences are, what they bring to it. And so I don't think that anybody should be less represented because they have a particular interest. I think all of the interests need to be represented. And I do think that there is maybe it becomes over time, because some school board members have been on for a very long time, that there is a lack of connectedness maybe to the parents and to the stakeholders, because there becomes a familiarity, with being in office for a very long time. So I do have concerns about that, and whether there is that natural inclination to connect with parents in the schools and parent-based issues and their concerns if you have been involved in the school board office for too long. I don't know if Sandy has that same take on it.
Well, I disagree with the take on it being special interest, because the types of things that we're talking about advocating for apply to all students. Whether you're talking about good food applies to all students. Whether you've got a group of people who are pushing forward, they're not pushing forward just for their own students, they're pushing for everyone. And as I say, we need to reach out to all people. For example, the Coalition of the Silence was formed in large part to make sure that we reached out to everyone. I support that effort. So,
I'm going to stop you right there, because we need to go to break.
Yes.
We'll be back.
She's had more than a dozen fractures. And in the next few years, she faces 2 major surgeries to strengthen her fragile bones. She's only 10 years old. Most people don't worry about fragile bones until late in life. For those with osteogenesis imperfecta, brittle bones are a concern throughout their lifetime. Find out how you can strengthen this child's future.
Diabetes is a killer. After I was diagnosed, I didn't feel sick, so I didn't listen to my doctor. Then it struck. I had a heart attack, then a stroke, and I was only 49.
Most people with diabetes also have high blood pressure and cholesterol, which can cause severe heart damage. In fact, 2 out of 3 people with diabetes die from heart disease or stroke.
Don't let diabetes destroy your life.
Call for your free diabetes survival guide. Choose to live.
to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back to Inside Scoop Virginia. I'm Bettina Lawton, your host, and today is our wrap-up session on the student rights and responsibilities. The school board met since our last program on this topic. I have Sandy Evans and Elizabeth Schultz with me. They are both school board members and very actively involved in that discussion. And when we left, Sandy, we were talking about the concept of special interest and importance and parent advocacies. And I wanted to finish that piece up before we moved on.
Yes, thank you, because I do want to push back on those who say that, because I don't see it that way. I think that those of us who are on the school board do have a special obligation to reach out and speak for those who may not be coming to the school board and may have a harder time. And so I think that that's, and we'll get into that with the student discipline issue as well, and the disproportionality of minority students and students with disabilities. Now, students with disabilities, there are some strong advocacy groups out there too. Coalition of the Silence is certainly advocating for students with both students with disabilities and minority students. But I think we to call all of these groups that we've mentioned, and we've named just a few, special interests, it does, I agree with Elizabeth that it denigrates the mission, because the mission really is to make the school system better for all students.
Okay, well, and that's an interesting perspective, because I always do hear them referred to as special interests, as if it's so narrow that nobody else really cares about whatever it is they're talking about. So I appreciate your perspective on it. Mm-hmm. I want to talk about student rights and responsibility. Mm-hmm. As those who saw the earlier show knows, I was on the committee, the ad hoc committee. I was appointed by Pat Hines, who represents Hunter Mill and mm-hmm. is the vice chair of the board. We met the end of October. We ended up meeting every single week for 4 or 5 hours. Mm-hmm. I was on the working group on the discipline process itself. We ended up meeting more frequently because the issues were so enormous and we were trying to grapple with those. We made a presentation, I think it was in March, that was our deadline. Mm-hmm. And I went to a working group session or whatever it is that the school board had on it, listened to that, and was fairly surprised. And I went to another meeting and discovered that the 52 recommendations that the committee made was not actually going to be considered, as you all call it, all this little lingo comes out, the main motion, you know, that the school system itself developed their own recommendations, and suddenly those were what was on the table. And if you wanted something different, you had to amend it. So I was very surprised, and I think a lot of the people, based on the conversation that happened amongst people on the ad hoc committee, a number of people were very surprised that that was the process. I mean, we didn't expect our recommendations to just sort of be adopted, you know, as a fait accompli. We just didn't expect it to end up having to be somebody else's, and then you have to try and fight back to where we thought we were starting the conversation. So I think a lot of people were very discouraged and surprised about that. But I do want to talk about parental notification, because we spent a lot of time in my working group session on that. We started with some language that you used. You had also had some language, Elizabeth, when we put that up there, and that sort of was where we were starting from to try and get that issue on the table for people. And we didn't end up with that. We started sort of basically saying, if you're going to question somebody's child, you've got to call the parent. If my kid's sick, you manage to find me. If they're in trouble, why can't you find me? Right. There were a number of folks who said, you shouldn't just have to tell me, this is my child. I ought to be able to be there. You ought not to be able to be questioning my child, because in reality, it's a huge power imbalance. You got kids, some of them little kids, some of them older kids, but by definition, their judgment is not good because they're, what do we call them? Kids. So, there ought to be some kind of an adult. So we had all of that. We had the issue of, if your parent can't come, there ought to be somebody saying to you, is that really what you saw? Is that really what you heard? Those types of things. None of which got adopted at the end of the day. It got sort of this, we will make these reasonable efforts to notify you, which were kind of like what the original one was. Let me
first of all, let me say, I have such a tremendous amount of gratitude for you and all of the other people who served on that committee. And I almost felt bad that we had to get to that point, because the school board, there were a number of us who did try the previous summer to enact some changes without having to get to that level. And it was only because a number of the colleagues were unwilling to make the changes that we had to get to the stage of involving a committee. But in the end, I felt that that was very representative of the will of a broad spectrum of the community. We were very thoughtful, I thought, in putting together the requirements, and to make sure that a lot of different segments of the Fairfax County community were represented on that committee. So very thankful about that. And if you look at the issue specifically of parental notification, you know, for some of us, for me in particular, and I'll speak for myself, I'm just a little bit more than shocked that the issue has come full circle back to where we started. It was as if the committee never did its work. And that's the disappointing thing. You're exactly right that at the end of the day, staff, the FCPS staff, got to craft the motion. And that has to do a little bit with school board leadership. I do think that that has some, it's very important to pay attention to who's the chair, because they're in charge of who's writing the main motion. So that was disappointing, because when you look at 52 recommendations and know that you all spent many, many hours putting those together, and that parental notification was one of the major points, and yet it didn't make it into the main motion, there is a disconnect there. So I'm chagrined. I'm a little apologetic to those who work so hard on the committee. And the other thing is that this is just a really fundamental concept, because if you're talking about by the time somebody is in custody, if you will, in a principal's office or an assistant principal's office, and has potentially gotten themselves in a significant amount of trouble and broken a school board policy, that they could get turned over to the police, they could get a long-term suspension, more than 10 days, or get expelled from school. You know, that's maybe when we should be talking to somebody's parent. And you're exactly right. If they're in the nurse's office throwing up, or if their library book is late, or if their lunch balance is low, they somehow get a hold of us, you know. So I do think this comes back down to just the basic rights of parents to be involved and be partners with the school system in the education and discipline of their children.
And I have been advocating for stronger parent notification. This will be my third year of doing so. I disagree, I believe, with Elizabeth a little bit. I think we have made significant progress, and I also want to thank you and the other members of the Ad hoc Committee. You did wonderful work in a very short space of time, and I know you thrashed through this, and word by word, line by line. I know from having tried to craft parent notification amendments just how difficult it is trying to find that line. I do think it's important to note, though, what we did do. Before the school board at the last meeting. We did have stronger parent notification for students before they write or sign a written statement. That, we have been looking for that for a couple of years now. And it is reasonable efforts, you're right, and it is only for the most egregious, where the student is going to really get in deep, deep trouble for an offense, the long-term suspension and the recommendation for expulsion. In those cases, we now have on the books now that reasonable efforts will be made before students ask to write or sign a statement. And that, to me, is very, very significant, because in the past we haven't had to do that.
Well, frankly, when I'm sitting on the committee and I heard about this, writing the statement, signing the statement, my antenna just went crazy. I mean, I did trial work for 20 years, and the notion that you would have a child in a custodial situation with that kind of a power imbalance, and they are writing statements and signing them without anybody advising them as to the consequence was shocking. And when I talked to people in the community and mentioned this to them, they were all like, what are you talking about? They can't do that.
And parents do react that way. That's one thing that's kind of missing, because they don't know that until they're in that situation. The parents I talk to, most of them believe we do that. Right. They are surprised that we have not been doing that. But the second piece of it, too, and I know Elizabeth is going to want to comment on this as well, that we now need to make reasonable efforts to notify the parents, as soon as, before we report the student to a school resource officer who is a uniformed police officer who is in our school. And in the past, we have not had a specific policy on the book that says we are reporting a student to the SRO, and we are now going to call the parents. We now approve that, and I believe the ad hoc committee took pretty much word for word the amendment that I had tried to get passed the year before. I tweaked it just a little bit to refine it, but we have that on the books now, and that also, I believe, is very significant, that a parent can rely on getting a phone call to say, we're reporting your student to a uniformed police officer, which we didn't have in the past. We did not get the questioning piece. We didn't get the parent notification before questioning. I had hoped to do that, and I know the ad hoc committee did as well. But I do see this as significant progress. And
Well, yeah, and this is where there's, on this issue, we agree on so much,
Yeah.
but on the amount of progress that we've made, I couldn't be more disappointed, because the principals themselves have said that in practice, absolutely nothing changed with the language that we adopted. So the fact that they have to make a reasonable effort means they don't have to reach you. They can make a phone call and say, well, there's no definition of a reasonable effort. And I'm really glad that you pointed out, Bettina, earlier, that this involves all students in the Fairfax County Public School system, K through 12. It's not just kind of mercurial teens who are on the fringe. This includes kindergartners. This includes second graders. I've just worked with a family who has a second grade little girl who was suspended. And you think, when you're suspending or expelling kindergartners and second graders, there's something fundamentally wrong when we've put at arm's length parents, and when we're making that a tussle with the school staff. Why is it that we are shrinking from the responsibility of involving them and saying, we'll make a reasonable effort to contact you? Certainly, if they need to raise money for a fundraiser for the school, they make every effort to contact us.
Or my personal favorite, if your kid has lice, they will find me.
They will find me. Well, we're going to go to break, and when we come back, we're going to talk some more about that, because that age issue really struck me as what happens when you've got really young children in this process. So stay with us. We'll be right back.
Art, a universal language, an expression of culture, of self, and now, thanks to Empowered Women International, a way for emerging and established immigrant and refugee artists and artisans to find hope to earn a living while enriching the lives of all of us. Empowered Women International, making a better America every day. For more information on Empowered Women International's educational programs, or to make a tax-free donation, contact cfrip at AOL.com.
Here, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty, kitty. Here, kitty, kitty.
You'd think it would be easy to tell which kids have trouble with their eyesight. But that's not always the case. Even though 1 in 4 children may have a vision problem, eye doctors tell us the symptoms aren't always so obvious. We do know that 80% of all childhood learning is visual. And without good vision, kids can have trouble learning to read and may fall behind in school. For clues on how to spot the real-life signs of childhood vision problems and what parents can do, visit checkyearly.com. A public service message from the Vision Council of America and Reading is Fundamental.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Exactly.
Should we stick with parent notification for a while, though, or no?
Yep. We're back. I'm Bettina Lawton. I'm your host, and we are talking with Elizabeth Schultz and Sandy Evans on the school board about the student rights and responsibility. And when we left, we were talking about the ages of children, and I want to note that Elizabeth, you made a motion that said no student age 10 or under shall be asked to write a statement, and you were the only vote for it. And I was shocked when I heard. I was sitting there screaming at my television, I must tell you this.
Well, I'm glad that it's a participatory sport for
It
you
was.
too, because the thought bubble over my head at that moment was probably a scream as well. I have to tell you that one was one of the ones that disappointed me the most, and the lack of understanding that the youngest children in our school system don't have the comprehension to understand that when they write a statement, even if it's a witness statement, that they may get it wrong, that what they write is either going to relate to their own suspension or their own expulsion or someone else's. And I think that's too great of a burden to put on our youngest children. And the fact that didn't carry actually 12-0 was a grave disappointment. That, and along with many of the amendments that I wrote pertaining to students with disabilities, because the students with disabilities make up only 14% of our student population in Fairfax County, but they make up more than 40% of the discipline infractions. So there's a great disproportionality. So when you're talking about our youngest students or our most vulnerable students with disabilities, these should have been no-brainers. And parents really need to be aware coming into this fall and beyond that not much has changed, and that you need to have a really significant conversation with your children about their conduct and about what could happen, because at the end of the day, they may be on their own. And not much is going to change in practice, unfortunately.
Well, I thought it was interesting because on my subcommittee on the discipline process, we had the representative of the elementary school principals. Marvelous man. And everyone on the working group said, if you were my children's principal, I would be comfortable with you talking to them. You're a great guy, whatever. But he actually did tell us when we were talking about how these written statements were voluntary. And he was very upfront, and he said, listen, let me just tell you, if I say to a kid, you don't have to sign up, but I'd really like you to, they will, every single time. So it didn't make any difference. And it was like, these are little kids.
The notion of what's voluntary, I think, to a young child in school is not,
And I would like to follow up on that point, because I think it's important to look at where we are and where we're going, because we're not done. One of the points that I'd like to make is that the next stage is going to be monitoring where we are. Where are we going to be with parent notification? You said that some principals are telling you that it's not going to make a difference. I believe it will. If it turns out that we look and it doesn't make any difference, if students still are being sat down and writing out statements before parents have any idea, then we have to go back at that. But we have to at least hope that the principals will implement this with good faith.
Well, who's going to do the monitoring? That's what I want to know.
And just one of the ad hoc committee's recommendations was to follow this with two committees. One was a committee on disproportionality, and to study why we have so many minorities and students and so many students with disabilities, as Elizabeth mentioned. And the other one was an ongoing advisory committee that would make recommendations and would monitor progress. We need to follow up on that. In fact, just today I put in a note to my colleagues saying that we need to bring that up at the next forum. For those who don't know, a forum is basically the first stage. You take something to a forum and then ask for a work session, and then at a work session you'll discuss that topic. So I'm hoping we can move forward with those two very important aspects that weren't it was not part of the document. So this is a separate path that we're going to be taking, but I'm certainly going to pursue that, and I believe other school board members will be interested in pursuing that as well.
And with regard to who's doing the monitoring, I got to tell you, this is a banner day for Fairfax County. Today is July 1st. So today is the first day of the new term of our new superintendent, Dr. Karen Garza. And I couldn't be more pleased. I think that the parents in Fairfax County, the teachers, the administrators, and most of all the students are certainly going to benefit from Dr. Garza's presence. So I think that we're in a new era that will prove beneficial. And I think that if we're going to ask something to be monitored, that we can be assured that, in fact, the information that we ask for will be forthcoming. It'll be forthcoming in a timely and comprehensive manner, so that we will learn very quickly whether or not any change is, in fact, occurring. But we do have to follow up on those instances where our minority students, our students with disabilities, our youngest students, and in all honesty, when you look at the numbers, it's boys, and it's boys between 6th and 8th grade who are really going to be, and you know, as a mother of 4 boys, I know, who are really going to be at greatest risk. So if you're a parent of a boy in Fairfax County, and particularly one who is a minority or younger, or a child with disabilities, you have got to be involved with that school right up front and say, if anything goes on from the very beginning, I want to be involved, I want to be a partner. So if the school is not going to reach out to you as a partner, then you as a parent have to inject yourself and be a partner in your child's education and discipline.
And I would say there's no way that you really know that. I mean, I can say, and this was definitely what I took away from the ad hoc committee, was the principals didn't really care if a parent said, I really want to be involved. They are very territorial about their schools. That notion that they floated, and frankly, I was, again, screaming at the television, when they're standing there saying, if we notify parents, if we do this, if we do that, we're going to have unsafe schools. And it was like the big boogeyman in the room. You can't do anything unless the principals agree.
Every one of these recommendations, including the ad hoc committee's recommendation, gave an exception for dangerous situations. So to the extent that people bring up, you know, the gun in the building or the knife in the building, you know, that is a red herring, because there's an exception for that, and no one is saying the principal shouldn't be able to act when there is a true emergency in the building. But when the situation is contained, you know, and if it's marijuana possession, you know, you've got the student there, you've got the substance there, that's contained. So, you know, we can move on there. I would like to put a little bit of perspective on it, though.
All right.
Just from, and I did go back to my very first year on the board, and 2010, the SR&R was passed with some staff recommendations, 4 minutes.
Good heavens.
It was 4 minutes that year. And it was, now Tina Hone, a former school board member, Tina Hone, did raise some concerns that she had during that and said she was going to bring them to us. October of that year, Tina Hone tried to get a work session. She brought it to a forum, like, you know, we're bringing to a forum the 2 different committees that the ad hoc committee recommended. Only 6 hands in the air for a work session in October of 2010.
Now, are these forums open to the public?
Oh yes, absolutely. They are open to the public. Kind of a little known thing, you know, kind of a
I've
little
never
known,
heard of them.
little known part of our process. You know, the forum, we bring issues of concern, and sometimes you say, well, we want a report, or I need a work session on this. Different outcomes, but usually what people are asking for is a work session on a topic. But Ms. Hone, and with the strong support of the advocacy groups, the Fairfax Zero Tolerance Reform did continue on, and then unfortunately, tragically, Nick Steuben did take his own life. And his parents talked about the downward spiral that he had been dealing with ever since he had been involved in the discipline system. That was on the front page of the Washington Post. And we did then go down this road. The school board did decide we really need to review our student discipline issues. And from that point on, you know, a year ago, we asked the ad hoc committee to take a look at this. And how many hours did we debate the other day? Not the length of time of a debate is talking about the quality of the debate, but I'm saying from the time when we took 4 minutes and didn't really want to, didn't see this as an issue. What I'm trying to say is I believe the conversation has changed.
Well, I think it has changed, and I think part of it is that people such as yourself and you, Elizabeth, got on, and you had that election, 2 years ago,
absolutely.
where a number of people who
were concerned about
activists
this.
showed up and said, I got to participate in this.
Yes.
So, well, and there is the notion that, slow progress is still progress. I keep wanting it more.
Well, and the fact that there has to be such a dogged conversation, and that some of us board members have to be relentless on issues, that's not good governance. So I guess maybe we need to have maybe a few more board members to have more common sense conversations. That would be my take on it. And that parents, aren't left, that they're the constituency of one at a time when a discipline action occurs in their own household to one of their students, because that's a lonely place to be, is when they thought all along they would get a phone call or that they would be a partnership partnership with the school system, and then they're deep in the recesses of a discipline action, and that's too late. That's too late to be involved. That's too late to get notified that an investigation has occurred and you're being notified of what's about to happen to your child.
Well, and the interesting thing that I also noticed was the committee recommended that when your child gets into a discipline process, there's a package that's put together at the school and it's sent to the hearing office, but it's not sent to the parents. And we recommended, and we had a hearing officer on our subcommittee, and we recommended that it automatically be sent to the parents. And there was a whole big thing, but you can't do it from the school because we have to, student confidentiality. Somebody's accusing your kid of something, but you don't have the right to know who it is who's making the accusations against your children, which I find appalling, by the way. But, and so we worked it with the person from the hearing office who said, yeah, if we could do that within 48 hours of when we get the packet, we can get it back out again. And we said, well, that'll work. Not there. If you have a problem, there's a phone number in the SR&R. Call.
One of the things that a phrase I've used often and will continue to use since I took office January a year ago is getting to yes. You can argue an issue to death on why not to do something, or you can roll up your sleeves and figure out how to get to yes. And on any of these issues, and certainly sending home a notification of the compilation of discipline issues related to someone's child, we can get that home. It's just a matter of will and getting to yes.
You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. Well, we are going to go to break before our last session, and I want to spend our last session, we'll give everybody a heads up where we're going. We want to talk about students with disabilities specifically. So stay with us. We will be right back.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Wanted some matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about $3,000. Nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Why don't you just wash your car at home?
When I wash my car, everything runs down the street and down into the storm drains. With all the chemicals in the soaps and waxes, the last thing I want to do is poison my own drinking water. At least here, it's all contained and recycled on site. That's why I also take my car in for oil changes instead of doing it myself. I might take a chance on spilling stuff. You know what the best part is?
What?
More time to kick back and watch the game.
How far would you go to protect the planet?
I want you to build an ark.
Here we go. Okay, that's good. Oh, okay. Ow!
Maybe there's another way.
People! The flood is imminent!
Is it too much to ask for a little precipitation?
Go to fightglobalwarming.com to find out what you and your community can do to reduce global warming pollution.
Somewhere around the world, there are men and women of the armed forces risking their lives, helping rebuild communities after natural disasters, collecting toys for needy children, tutoring kids in school, These are your sons and daughters who work to keep us safe, secure, and free. Dedicated men and women who put their country first.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Welcome back. I'm Bettina Lawton, your host, and this is the final segment of our final show for this year anyway, on the student rights and responsibility. I have Sandy Evans with me and Elizabeth Schultz. They are both school board members who are very active in this area. I want to turn, as we said before we went to the break, to the issue of students with disability. Because Elizabeth, you said earlier they're like 14% of the student population, but 40% of the disciplinary problems. And I'm not sure why that is. I thought that there were requirements, federal requirements, that said if a student is disabled, they have to be accommodated in some fashion. So if you're a parent of a student with disability, we've now had this board meeting. I know there were a lot of really technical recommendations that came out of the committee. What's actually going to happen? Is it any different for students with disabilities than it is with everybody else, as we've been talking about?
Well, I'm really glad you asked that, because not only am I the liaison to the board's committee on student with disabilities, I'm also a parent. I had mentioned earlier that I have 4 boys. 2 of my boys have an individual education plan, or an IEP. One is a special education student, and one is what we call twice exceptional. So brilliant but hampered. And I also have a student who has a 504 plan, which is slightly less in terms of the amount of accommodations that he receives. So, so I live it, and I live it as a school board member, and I live it as a parent. And it is important to know that a lot of work went into these amendments, because the work came from the committee. Again, it was this committee's work. The committee that you were on had a subcommittee on students with disabilities and people who were really well versed in disabilities law. And to know that this board didn't accept and pass and implement protections for students with disabilities means that if you are a parent of a child with disabilities and who's a student in Fairfax County Public Schools, they really don't have any different treatment under this new SR&R. And I mean, I do think that the document overall is definitely going to be improved. It's going to be less legalistic. No offense to no offense to you. It just makes it an easier read and an easier implementation for understanding. But at the end of the day, in practical implementation, what does that mean? And it means that our population of students with disabilities at 14% is likely to continue to be overrepresented, because we really didn't change anything in that regard. And I do wish that we had increased our protections for them, and maybe for our youngest students, ask them not to write statements, or that if a child with intellectual or developmental disabilities, a child with Down syndrome, I mean, I even had an amendment there to protect them and not ask them for written statements. But I think that you've started a culture of change, but I think there's a lot more to do, a lot left.
Well, I want to make sure I just understood what you said. So most people are familiar with children who have Down syndromes. The principal or the assistant principal can ask a student with Down syndrome to write a statement and sign it?
Yes, ma'am.
Without the parents being there, or they have to be notified, right? They still have to be notified. But I thought the whole premise
or Asperger's, or anyone on that kind of spectrum. That's the unfortunate thing, is that when there is a staff recommendation on the table to follow the staff's main motion, and your work as a committee was set aside, those 52 recommendations, then we had to scrap for each one of those recommendations on our own and come up with 7 votes, where I really think we should have had 12. When you're talking about, again, children 10 and under, children with disabilities, and children on any number of spectrums, including the intellectual and developmental disability spectrum.
No, we did make some changes. They didn't go as far as the ad hoc committee would have gone. right now we did add an amendment in there that said, I'm going to have to try to remember the exact language, but it said that the staff should consult an IEP rather than staff had put in may, I believe, and
I think we put
and
in
one
must.
and right.
And you kind of split the baby and went with should.
Right. And that's what that amendment does. So we did add that in there, but it did not go as far as the ad hoc committee would have gone. It did go farther than what we've got now.
Well, let me ask you this.
So
along with the lines
there are
of,
several of those.
of the
along
definition
those,
of
yeah.
sort of reasonable efforts, and then
Right.
who's going to monitor. When the rule is the principal or whomever should consult with the people who are in charge of these IEPs or however that works. 'Cause I know what it is, but I don't know how it really works. And then they don't. I mean, is there a standard that says, we told you you should do it, 98% of the time you didn't do it? I mean, how does that how does that work?
And that's where I think we have to come back to this, because again, every year we do look at the SR&R. You know, it's an annual thing that we do. If we can get this committee, this advisory committee, that would be something to task them with as well. And we can always ask the superintendent for a report telling us, you know. We also can monitor it ourselves in a different way. We do see some of these cases, and for some time now I have been watching very carefully to see exactly when, for example on parent notification, what time was the parent called, you know, compared with when the student was brought in. So, and principals now will need to document the parent notification efforts. So this is something that we have set in motion, so we have the ability to monitor it. So you're right, if it says should, and 98% do not, we know we haven't gotten where we need to be. If 99.9% do, then the question is, okay, was there some special circumstance in that 0.1?
Well, and Bettina, I'll tell you, as an attorney, you know the word should doesn't mean anything legally. You know, so you either shall or shall not. You may or you shall. And may is permissive and shall is prescriptive. And that was one of the big issues, and that's why the meeting, I think we went till 1:30 in the morning. I mean, you did laud our
parse through those.
Yeah, you did laud our tenacity for hanging on, and it's unfortunate that you have to have that much discussion, because you should eat an apple every day. Well, what happens if you don't?
If you don't,
you know, you should brush your teeth every day. What happens if you? So there's no or, there's no and so now we're left with being in a position that many more students will pass through the discipline process, and we'll have to see, unfortunately, after the fact, how it goes. I hope it goes well. It should go well.
But wish.
And just
what happens if it doesn't?
You know, I felt that we should say you must consult the IEP.
Right.
You know,
it just seems kind of logical, actually.
But you know, so I'm not saying that we're you know that we didn't go as far as I would have liked us to go in several different areas, but we still moved. You know, I guess that's what I'm saying.
I reminded the board that we're in a unique position where we act as the executive, the judicial, and the legislative branch, all in one. And it requires political will to make changes. I mean, you have to put forth the effort, and you have to be willing to go out there on your intestinal fortitude and say, you will do something. And unfortunately, we didn't get to 7 votes on much of that, because people wouldn't say, you know what, I'm going to stake the claim on common sense. Like you said, it sort of made sense on a number of those issues, but they weren't willing to go there. And that's the thing that I think people need to pay very, very close attention to in terms of their elected officials, because we do set the policy that the staff has to implement. And so if we don't set the policy, it won't be implemented, even though it should.
I love it. Well, and I do want to just say that, you know, you talk about the advisory committee that may be set up, but the reality is that it's the staff who provides the advisory committee with the kind of information that would be needed for the monitoring. And so to the extent that I know there was some reference that said these student statements, there's now going to be a form, so you have some sort of guidance as to what you're supposed to do. And I would encourage that same thing for this monitoring of parental notification so that it isn't left up to the principal to decide whether or not to say, okay, the kid got off the school bus, but I didn't call the parents till 2. There needs to be a place that says, when did this start?
I agree.
When did you call? And I think the same thing with, why didn't you? If the aspirational goal is that you contact the IEP team, and you don't, why didn't you?
Right.
And I think that has to be set out, and the expectation has to be set out at the beginning, in fairness to the principals, in fairness to the people who are trying to implement this, so that when you come back a year from now to say, so how did this work? Everybody's been working off the same expectation of information.
Well, and I think you've hit on a very important point, and this goes to the fact that I think a vast majority of the principals do want to do the right thing, but it shouldn't be the luck of the draw for a parent or a student on are they in the right school boundary? Right. What would have happened to them if they lived in the next school boundary? And to me, in the end, that's in fairness to the principals, is then there's so much that is to their discretion, and they are the captains of their ship, but there's points where there's policy and things that need to be done should be done to the benefit for all the children, so that one child who commits one offense has a relative same outcome as a child who creates another, the same offense in a different school boundary. And that, I think, is more fair to the principals, because we're not going to pit one principal against another and say you're doing this well and you're not doing this well after the fact. Right. I think it would have been more fair to them to provide clear direction up front.
Right.
And I think it's important to remember some of the other things that we've done. I do believe that we have, again, change the conversation to one that's more, we are an educational institution. We need to be using positive behavior approaches. We need to be using restorative justice approaches. And so we haven't even talked about the referring students to alcohol and drug services when for first-time marijuana possession. Now, again, we have a may in there versus a must. So that's something that the ad hoc committee, so that changed. So again, we need to see how that's actually going to work out in practice.
Well, we're hearing the music, which means that we are done for this year, but I really appreciate both of you coming on and taking the time and talking so really clearly about these issues. We'll wait and see what happens next year, how it works with the new superintendent, and then we'll do this all over again when we've got some results that we can report out. So.